And this is going on page 24 when we are done. Do you know what an x-intercept is? Yes? Do you know what a y-intercept is? Yes. Okay. Which axis is this? Which axis is this? X. Which axis would you find an x-intercept on? The x-axis. That's why it's called an x-intercept, right? What axis do you find a y-intercept on? The y-axis. All right. We know all those things? You got this. Okay. Now there's some little, nitpicky things you got to pay attention to in here, but overall, you should have this basic concept for sure. All right. So we know that intercepts are points, okay? They're points on a graph where the graph intersects the x or y axis. We know that an x-intercept occurs on the x-axis, but it also occurs where y equals what? 0. X-intercept, y equals 0. Y-intercept, x equals 0. Yes? Okay. X-intercept on the x-axis, y-intercept on the y-axis. If it is a function, can it have, obviously, is this a function, our picture here? Okay, so it can obviously have more than one x-intercept. Could it still be a function and have more than one y-intercept? No. Exactly, it would fail the vertical line test. Very good. So this says a function, so we're talking specifically functions right now, not just any graph. It can have 0 plus x-intercepts, so you could have an infinite amount of x-intercepts. We'll look at some graphs like that, but at most, one y-intercept. So at most means maybe I don't have one at all, but if I do, I can only have one, right? We good? Now, terminology is important here also, because yes, we can call, this is an x-intercept. What's another name for that? 0, root, solution, 0, root, solution, x's, right? X-intercept, they all mean the same thing, but we don't denote them all the same way. If it says intercept, okay, intercepts, whether it's x or y, intercepts are always ordered pairs. That's important because you write your intercepts differently than you do your zeros, even though they are the same thing they represent the same thing on the graph, and we might think of them kind of interchangeably. So you have to pay attention to wording of questions as well. If it says, what is the x-intercept? You write it as an ordered pair. If it says, what is the x value of the x-intercept? Would you write it as an ordered pair? No, because it's just asking you for a number. Does that make sense? So make sure you actually read the question so you know how to answer it correctly, because that matters too. All right, so we're going to identify the x and y intercepts of the functions graphed below. So on number 1, do we have any x-intercepts? Nope, so the answer is none. We have one y-intercept, and on a y-intercept, what is 0? The x, yeah, so it's 0, 5. Do I have an x-intercept in number 2? Yes, I do. It's right here. And my x-intercept is when y is 0, so I'll put my 0 in there. And what is that? 4? 4, 0. And then my y-intercept is going to be 0, 2. Right? Piece of cake. Definitely Algebra 1 material here. How many x-intercepts do I have in number 3? 4. There's actually 4. 1, 2, and I know sometimes these graphs are hard to look at when you're glancing at them. So I got 4 of them. So we're going to list them out. So my first one is negative 1, 0. And then that's a comma. There's no U because these are not intervals. These are ordered pairs. Then I have 1, 0. Then I have 2, 0. Then I have 3, 0. So then, do I have a y-intercept? Yes, it's up here. And that is going to be 0, 6. Let's see, I have it so I won't have to count. It's a little, yeah, 0, 6. Okay. Number 4, do I have any x-intercepts? No. What's there instead of an x-intercept? Asymptote. I got an asymptote there, so there are none. Do I have any y-intercepts? No, because I have another asymptote. None. Okay, easy enough? Yes? Okay, good deal. Okay, so we talked about x-intercepts. Let's talk about zeros. Again, those words sometimes are used interchangeably, but they do have a little bit of a difference. So the zeros, it is the x values. Oh, okay, let me spell it correctly. Values, oh my goodness. Values, there we go. X values where the function intersects the x-axis. Okay. So an intercept is an ordered pair. A zero is just the x value, but it's of the same points, like they're the same place on the graph. Okay? So when we go to find them algebraically, to find the zeros, we set f of x equal to 0. So what is another way to say f of x? Y. So in the zeros, which is my x-intercepts, that is when y equals 0, right? So I set y equal to 0, or f of x equal to 0, and solve for x. That's for our zeros. For the y-intercepts, I could say set x equal to 0 and solve for y, but another easier way to say that is just that we want f of 0. Because that means we substitute in 0 for x and solve for y, basically. So that's the functional way to talk about it, something we need to be able to say functionally and read it and know what it's asking us, and not that it's making it crazy hard or anything. Okay? We all good so far? All right. So now we're going to find the zeros and the y-intercept for each function algebraically. All right. So the first thing we're going to do, set f of x equal to 0. So 0 equals negative absolute value of x minus 5 plus 3. So I would like for this thing to be positive, so I'm going to move this whole thing over to the left. So I'm going to get absolute value of x minus 5 equals 3. All right, so now I have an absolute value function I have to solve. That means whatever's inside of here could be positive or could be negative. So I have two things. I have x minus 5 equals 3, and I have negative x minus 5 equals 3. So this will give me x equals 8. That's one of them. Then if I multiply both sides by a negative 1, I'll get x minus 5 equals negative 3. Then I add 5. What's negative 3 plus 5? 2, positive 2. So those are my two x values. So I have two zeros. And these are not intercepts, so I'm not writing them as an ordered pair. It is a set of x values. So I need my squiggly brackets. And we go from least to greatest to 8. Just like that. And nobody's going to be judging your squiggly brackets. If it's clear you attempted to make a squiggly bracket, you're fine. Some people were stressing out over that last period. Not in art class. It's fine. Just make an attempt and we're okay. Okay? Everybody good? So then I need f of 0. So f of 0 is going to equal negative absolute value of 0 minus 5 plus 3. So 0 minus 5 is negative 5. The absolute value makes it positive, but then this makes it negative. So I have then I have negative 5 plus 3, which means f of 0 equals negative 2. So my y-intercept, and it says y-intercept here, 0, negative 2. So y-intercept, so x is 0. Any questions at all? Okie dokie. Let's flip it over when you're ready. Okay, so still same instructions. We're finding the we're finding the zeros in the y-intercept algebraically. So we're going to start off with f of x being 0. So 0 equals 2x squared minus 7x minus 4. So would I start this by adding 4 to both sides? No. This is what kind of equation? It's a quadratic. Good. So it's a quadratic, which means I want to try and factor it. That's usually your first go-to for that. And don't lose the fact that it's an equation. All right? You can't have random stuff all over the place. So I have an equation. This equals 0 cannot fall off. I don't have a GCF. A is not 1, so I'm going to factor by grouping. 2 times negative 4 gives me a negative 8. So I need two numbers that multiply to give me a negative 8, subtract to give me a negative 7. 8 and 1. Okay, good. So I get 0 equals, I got 2x squared minus 8x plus x minus 4. And remember, always double check that whatever you have here would combine back together to get you that, so you don't have your signs backwards or any other, thing that we're all capable of. So I still have 0 equals, not dropping that off. Okay, organized work is important. I'm going to group these two, group those two. So I get 2x times x minus 4 plus 1 times x minus 4. Minus 4. So 0 equals 2x plus 1 times x minus 4. All right, so yesterday we were done at this point, right? Because we were just factoring. But I factored it. This time I have an equation. I need to solve it. So what is my next step? Set them equal to 0. Good. We're going to use our 0 product property. So we have 2x plus 1 equals 0 and x minus 4 equals 0. So x is equal to negative 1/2 and x equals 4. So these are my zeros. I have negative 1/2 and 4. Any questions at this point? This is why we reviewed factoring yesterday. Okay, so then I also need f of 0. F of 0 is going to be 2 times 0 squared minus 7 times 0 minus 4. So what is f of 0? It's negative 4, right? I can kind of see from here that if I put these are going to zero out, I'm just left with negative 4 anyway. My y-intercept 0, negative 4. Any questions? All right, so you could be asked to do all of this. You could just be given something that looks like this, or maybe it says f of x instead of 0, and just ask you how many zeros or how many x-intercepts would the function have. Your answer would be 2. Okay, so some of their questions are going to look like that. You have to be able to tell from its factors as well. Okay, we good? All right, let's look at number 9. So we have 0 equals x to the 4th minus 5x squared plus 4. All right, so this is not a quadratic, it's a quartic, but I can treat it like a quadratic at first, right? And a is 1, so that's really good, and I can factor this. 0 equals, I'm going to have my two sets of parentheses here. This will be x squared and x squared. This is positive, so the signs are the same. This is negative, so they're both negative. Two numbers that multiply to give me 4, combine to give me 5. 1 and 4. So 1 and 4. Can I factor farther? Yes, because what is this situation called? Difference of squares. And what's this? Difference of squares. Exactly. So I get 0 equals x plus 1 times x minus 1 times x plus 2 times x minus 2. So now that I have it all factored, how many x-intercepts do I have? 4 because I have these 4 factors here, right? So now I get x plus 1 equals 0, x minus 1 equals 0, x plus 2 equals 0, x minus 2 equals 0, x equals negative 1, x equals 1, x equals negative 2, x equals 2. Okay. So I could list out all 4. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, but I could also do something like this, plus or minus 1 and plus or minus 2. That comes in handy, especially when we have a lot of things to list. But again, listing out all 4 least to greatest, perfectly fine. And the whole least to greatest thing can get a little tricky sometimes if, let's say I just had plus or minus 1 and then 2, or plus or minus 2 and then 1. Like, where does it go in between? You just do the best you can. That's fine. Okay. We good? Any questions? All right, so then we have f of x, or f of 0. What's f of 0 going to be? 4, because those clearly just zero out. It's just 4. So this is just 0, 4. Now, just a little side note here. Like I said, you could have, them just ask you here, how many factors do you have, or how many, I'm sorry, not how many factors, how many x-intercepts do you have? Could have something that looks like this. F of x is equal to, and this is just another example, it's not tied to that at all, x plus 3 squared times x minus 5. Okay. So that's going to, if I multiplied all that back together, that's a cubic function, right? This was a quartic and we had 4. But as far as how many x-intercepts I have here, I don't have 3, I only have 2 because this one's a double root. Does that make sense to you? So this is a double root, I would only have 2. You could write this as x plus 3 times x plus 3 times x minus 5. Now the more appropriate way to write it is like it is right here. But if it's written out like this, just because you see 3 factors doesn't mean that you have 3 x-intercepts, because this really should be written like this. Okay, so if you have a double, remember it only counts as 1. Okay, we good on that? Okay, any questions at all at this point? Okay, perfect. All right, then let's look at number 10. So I set 0 equal to x cubed minus 6x squared minus 7x. What should I do first? GCF, good. So 0 equals x times x squared minus 6x minus 7. You go ahead and finish that one up. Okay, when I get to this point, I know I'm going to have how many intercepts? 3. There are 3 factors. I have 1, 2, 3. You cannot forget about this guy. He gets forgotten about a lot, and it hurts his feelings. He matters big time. So my I have x equals 0, x minus 7 equals 0, and x plus 1 equals 0. So this is one of them. Then I have x equals 7 and x equals negative 1. So I have 3 because there were 3 factors there. And then I'm going to have negative 1, 0, and 7. That's one reason this example's on here. You can't forget about him. He's the easiest one on there, but he gets forgotten about and neglected a lot. Don't do that, okay? Then my f of 0, what's f of 0 going to be? 0. So your y-intercept is 0, 0. Okay. Any questions at all? All right, so go ahead and get this folded and taped in on whatever page we wrote at the top, because I always forget by the time we finish.